We'll give everybody a minute just to log in. So we'll start in 1 minute. Excellent. I think we already have. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone, and good morning, and just very grateful for all of you taking the time, and special thanks to the team at ICCR, Isava and Josh Sinner for really the opportunity to share our research with all of you and the ICCR members. I would like to start with a number, which is $30 trillion. This is the size of the global sustainable investment market last year, which is a new record high. We have also seen a significant jump in signatures of the UN Principles for Responsible Investment PRI, which has now more than 3,800 members, representing more than $100 trillion in assets under management. But what does this mean for the people and the planet? Are we better off by this rise of sustainable investment? Unfortunately, the answer is not very much. We have now seen ample evidence that shows that while ESG investing can help improve risk-adjusted returns of your portfolios, it is not resulting in better people and planet outcomes. In fact, the achievement of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are now on track to be achieved 62 years behind schedule by 2092. So we believe that as institutional investors, we need to think differently, get out of our comfort zone, and be ready to innovate if we really want to play an active role in addressing urgent social and sustainability challenges. And in that way, provide lasting investment opportunities for our clients and beneficiaries for generations to come. So our session today is designed to provide a different perspective on how to do just that. We'll share the finding of our 12-month research project that we published in January called We Need to Talk, why it's time for institutional investors to embrace SDG-Aligned Investing. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mirtha Kastrapeli. I'm the founder and CEO of Beyond Alpha. I'm also a fellow at Columbia University Center on Sustainable Investing, CCSI. And before that, I was a managing director and global head of State Street Center for Applied Research in Boston. It's my pleasure to be joined today with my colleague, Luciana Aquino-Hagedorn. She's an international lawyer, a private investor, and also a senior fellow at CCSI. Luciana founded and was co-head of Goodwin's Impact and Responsible Investment Practice, and also worked at Harvard Management Company and Linklaters. So thank you, Luciana, for joining us today. So before we begin our presentation, I want to start by asking you a question, a polling question. And we would like to know what's currently driving your ESG investment and engagement strategies. And you can select either all of them or just the ones that that you do. So the options are, are you focusing on issues regarding risk management or financial materiality? Are there issues that can impact both risk-adjusted returns and stakeholders, client, employee, society, what is called double materiality? Are you focusing purely on disclosure on ESG issues when you think about your engagement strategies? Or are you also looking at disclosure and management of negative externalities? So we'll give everybody a minute just to see your responses. So Isabel, I don't know, whenever we have the polls ready, I don't know how many people have voted already. Excellent. So yes, so not surprising, and increasing disclosures is clearly the topic of choice for a lot of engagement efforts. We'll talk about that later. But it is better than expected in regards to kind of the 57% of people that are already thinking about negative externalities. So definitely a little better than that we have seen, which is not surprising from this group of people. So with this polling question, I'm going to pass it now to Luciana, who is going to share some of the findings of our research.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for joining us. So 2020 was clearly a difficult and traumatic year for all of us. The different crises that we faced contributed to a growing awareness of the scope and scale of the social and sustainability challenges that we face. From the climate emergency and the loss of biodiversity to income inequality and systemic racism. Investors are paying attention and they want to take action. Contrary to what many expected, the economic contraction resulting from the pandemic did not induce investors to flee from sustainable and socially conscious investment funds. In fact, we have seen a consistent increase in global ESG investing. This explosion has been driven in large part by the expectation that these type of strategies give investors an opportunity to not only achieve their financial objectives, but also that it allows them to use their capital to address our society's most pressing challenges. But what if I tell you that ESG investment strategies, as currently designed, are not translating into better people and planet outcomes? This is exactly what we found in our 12 months research. This disconnect should be very concerning for all institutional investors, particularly those that have expressed a commitment to sustainability and equality. The fact that investors' actions are not resulting in positive change undermines the credibility of the investment community. We need a new approach. We need to fundamentally change the way we, as an industry, define and approach ESG investing. We need to transition from ESG to a system-level approach, such as SDG-Aligned Investing. This strategy is centered on investing not only to deliver better risk-adjusted returns, but also on ensuring that all investment decisions do their best not to undermine the health of our shared social and environmental systems. Let me explain why investors' actions are falling short. ESG integration, the investment strategy that is seen as the largest growth in the US, according to US SIF, has been very successful at doing what it was designed to do, manage risk. Yet, there is no evidence that ESG integration has been able to create real-world impact. The key reason for this is that ESG integration was designed as a risk management tool, not ESG impact. ESG integration is not intended to actively promote positive social and environmental outcomes. Because of this, it is not surprising that ESG investing lacks any type of impact tracking. Another sustainable investment approach that we studied is impact investment. As some of you may be considering this as part of your portfolio, impact investment is defined as investments made in companies or organizations with the intent to contribute to measurable positive social or environmental impact alongside financial return. While we are very supportive and encouraged by developments in this space, we also found some challenges with this approach. There are also significant differences in how impact investing can be practiced in the public markets versus the private markets. In the public markets, where most capital is invested, impact investing appears to be at earlier stages of development. Now, in the case of private markets, where impact investors have been more active, impact deals tend to be small and more expensive when compared to traditional private investments, which makes it more difficult for mainstream investors to do this type of deals. Having said that, we do see impact investing as an opportunity to provide solutions to address the systemic risks identified by some of the SDGs. We hope that as the industry develops, it will be able to attract more and more institutional capital. So if ESG integration and impact investment won't help us create better people and planet outcomes, do we have better options? The answer is yes. SDG-aligned investment provides an opportunity to do just that. But you may be asking yourself, as investors, as fiduciaries, how can we justify this shift? We have identified 3 key reasons. In the slide here, you can see it. The first one is SDGs provide a system-level framework for investors. Second one, SDGs are a proxy for resilience. And 3, they provide the much-needed blueprint for people and planet outcomes. On the first point, the SDGs serve as a robust and comprehensive framework to strengthen the shared environmental and social systems that global investors' portfolios rely on. We need to become system thinkers and recognize that the 17 SDGs are interconnected and indivisible. Protecting these systems is fundamental for institutional investors, diversified, large, long-term investors. These type of investors are called universal owners. Dr. Ellen Quigley at Cambridge University noted in her award-winning academic study that large diversified investors with long-term investment horizons have an interest in the health of the economy and the society as a whole due to the nature of their portfolios, because they largely own a representative slice of the economy. For example, let's think of inclusion and diversity as an example of a system. The finance industry has unfortunately played a critical role in perpetuating an equal wealth distribution to communities of color through well-documented modern-day redlining techniques that relate to mortgage loans, excessive account fees. According to the Economic Policy Institute, income inequality is slowing US economic growth by reducing demand by 2 to 4%. Similarly, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco determined that gender and racial gaps created a 2.9 trillion in losses to US GDP in 2019. Moreover, a recent report from Citigroup itself calculated that eliminating racial disparity would add 5 trillion to the US economy over the next 5 years. This drag on GDP directly reduces the return on a diversified portfolio on the long term. So it is in the universal owner's best interest to address gender and racial inequalities holistically. On the second point, alignment with the SDGs is also helpful when analyzing companies' resilience. In the case of inclusion and diversity, there has been extensive evidence that gender, ethnic, cultural, cognitive, and socioeconomic diversity have an impact on a company's profitability. This relationship is more important than ever. A 2019 study by McKinsey shows that the relationship between profitability and gender diversity has actually increased over the past 5 years. For the investment industry specifically, research into 2,400 investment teams by Willis Towers Watson found that globally diverse groups outperform those with no gender-oriented minority employees by an average of 20 basis points per year. Lastly, the 12 SDGs and its 169 targets do provide a much-needed blueprint for social and environmental outcomes. Even though the SDGs are not perfect, they do provide a common set of environmental and social performance aspirational goals for companies to follow. And now I'll pass it back to Mirtha.
Yes. Thank you, Luciana. And hopefully now that she convinced you of the importance of thinking differently about ESG and why the SDGs are important, I will now tell you how you can begin to make the SDGs as a central component to your investment and engagement decision-making process. So this journey begins with the realization that all investments always have an impact on society and the environment. And we need to be ready to move beyond focusing exclusively on portfolio financial performance and find ways to incorporate the positive and negative impacts or externalities into the decision-making process. So our paper presents the basis for SDG-aligned investing around what we're calling the 3 C's: conviction, clarity, and consensus, which is in the next slide. In conviction, it really starts with the understanding or with the belief that the SDGs are interconnected and indivisible, and that their achievement will strengthen the shared social and environmental systems and create long-term value and resilient markets for generations to come. Part of this conviction requires that investors embrace not only financial materiality, but also, and more importantly, a broader definition of materiality, such as double materiality, where you consider the information of how a company's activities impact financial performance, as well as how it affects a broader set of stakeholders. We recognize that we may not be able to get all the data points and quantitative analysis that we're accustomed to when we're making investment decisions, because measuring impact data is really hard, and this is another of the findings of our research. But that should not prevent us from taking a stand on issues that affect the economic, social, and environmental fabric of our communities, which is the basis for our long-term returns. So that's conviction. The second C is clarity, which includes both clarity of definition and clarity of impact. Clarity of definition, it's about having a clear understanding and honest understanding of what current sustainable investment strategies do and do not do concerning the achievement of the SDGs. An SDG-aligned investment approach seeks to have a positive impact and reduce or avoid negative externalities through the strategic investment and management of assets. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And this approach is different from ESG integration and impact investing. Specifically on ESG integration, as Luciana pointed out earlier, ESG integration provides information or provides insights on how environmental, social, and governance issues impact the risk and returns characteristics of a portfolio, while SDG also looks at how that portfolio impacts environmental, social, and governance, right? So it impacts the world. So it's, again, the other side of the coin of ESG. Now, in the case of impact investing, we see impact investment as a subset of SDG-aligned investment, as long as the impact of that investment across all SDGs, either positive or negative, is internalized throughout the life of that investment. So that's clarity of definition. Now, in regards to clarity of impact, is, as I said earlier, the understanding that all investments always have an impact. Therefore, it is necessary to analyze both the positive and negative effects of a portfolio's underlying holdings towards the achievement of the SDGs. So recent efforts to standardize sustainability reporting by standard-setting companies like the IFRS could be an important step towards having that kind of clarity of impact needed to build an SDG-aligned investment approach. For us at Beyond Alpha, we started a project to measure SDG alignment for portfolio companies in emerging markets as a start, to help investors make better informed decisions around equity selection and engagement, as well as to help us create a basis for a rigorous fund level impact assessment. So again, I'll be happy to share more information on that later. And the last C is the consensus, right? So we need consensus among investors on what's expected from companies regarding SDGs. This type of agreement is critical to amplify the effect that investors have on companies' activities and consequently on our shared systems. Right now, companies are getting a mixed signal on what's expected from them in regards to ESG issues. And this is something that was presented by a great paper last year with Professor Rigovon at MIT. And we have also specific recommendations in our report that we encourage you to read for asset owners and asset managers and how they can start implementing these 3 C's, which we call the basis for SDG-Aligned investing. We've also identified, which is in the next slide, specific investment strategies that are best suited to contribute to the SDGs, including guardrails or minimum standards, active engagement, impact investing, public-private partnerships, divestments. So these are all the different pieces of the puzzle, let's say, or what we have in our toolbox that investors can use to, again, create this alignment. So we can definitely talk more about that during our Q&A session. Now, we recognize that the SDGs are not perfect. We're also aware that they were not specifically designed for investors. It is also true that investors' actions alone will not be enough to achieve the SDGs in the next decade. However, we believe that the SDGs do provide the opportunity to create a common set of impact goals shared across different stakeholders, from investors, corporations, civil society, governments at a global level. The SDGs can become the framework for investors to collectively address these shared, complex, system-level challenges and provide a much-needed map for investors to focus on real-world outcomes, reduce externalities, and take on an active role in engaging with companies to address pressing social and environmental issues. We recognize that the journey from SDG-aligned investing, from ESG to SDG-aligned investment will not be easy. Still, we believe that this change from ESG to impact to SDG is already happening and will only accelerate in the years to come. It is no longer enough for institutional investors to hide their head in the sand by saying that as long as I beat the market benchmark, my work is done. Instead, institutional investors' influence in the markets comes with great responsibility, and calls for accountability will only increase. To accomplish this, investors need a strong conviction, a greater sense of clarity, and widespread consensus, as well as an expanded toolbox to influence companies' activities towards better people and planet outcomes. If institutional investors assume this critical role in supporting a globally agreed sustainability agenda embodied by the SDGs, we will be able to meet the rising expectations of the moment and provide resilient investment opportunities for our clients and beneficiaries for generations to come. So with that thought, I'm going to stop here and really open it to questions, comments, really trying to hear your reactions, things that you agreed on, and maybe, or things that you disagreed on. We would be really, really excited to hear from you.
Okay, Mirtha, we have a few questions here in the chat box. I think the first one would be a great one for you to answer. How do you approach small, medium investment firms and companies and raise their awareness regarding the SDGs?
Yes, so I'm looking at now. So a small, so what is the question? I have the Q&A box open. Is it from Danielle?
There's one from an anonymous attendee. That's the first one.
Okay, I don't think I'm seeing it, but can you read it again?
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you approach small, medium investment firms and companies and raise their awareness regarding the SDGs?
Yes. So there's a lot of efforts already underway to support companies with on the achievement of the SDGs, to support corporations, right? So the work of the UN, the UN Global Compact, they're working with organizations already that are, again, supporting the business community. Now, the problem that we're seeing is, is this disconnect that companies on one end are getting some guidance from UN and these organizations to align their activities with the SDGs, but we are not, investors are not necessarily doing that, right? Investors are, most of their attention, and again, this is something that we saw with the US CIF numbers, the survey that came out last year, that is really all about ESG integration. So ESG integration, it's again where most of the resources are, most of their attention is focusing on that approach, which is purely a risk management tool. We're not really looking at the SDGs to think about impact. This is from the investment community. Now, there are SDG analyses or SDG aligned research or products that are in the market. What we found in our research, and please, Luciana, add it as you see fit, but we found that there is what is called SDG cherry picking, where you can see, think about, out of the 17 SDGs, I'm supporting, let's say, water usage, right? Like SDG number 6, or I'm supporting, let's say gender equality, but we're looking at these issues in a vacuum, right? The companies are looking at this in a vacuum because there's not kind of that understanding or the application of looking at the SDGs as interconnected and indivisible. And that idea, again, shows that we need to think from a system, we need to look at the SDGs as a system level framework. We cannot look at issues in a vacuum. And unfortunately, that's what's happening right now. So that's one piece, kind of the SDG cherry picking. And the other piece is that we're looking at SDGs that are material to a company. So same idea it's basically the new ESG is this SDG. Is like, out of the 17 SDGs, what are some of these SDGs that are material to my company? And those are the ones that I need to care about, rather than thinking of how my company or my portfolio, if you're an investor, is affecting the world, affecting the 17 SDGs. So it's that double materiality emphasis that is not happening currently. So I answered the question from the investment side, obviously not from the company side.
Yeah, what I would say is that there are some tools that are helpful in how to approach it. And again, there's right now, there's no I would say, go-to place where you can, find an off-the-shelf solution. But both from an investment perspective and from a company perspective, a tool that I think has been quite well developed is the IRIS Plus by the Global Impact Investing Network. And that's a tool, that you have to adjust to your own purposes, but it helps you, see how SDGs can be tied to investments. And again, keeping in mind the things that Mirtha just said, that you're going to find that in some cases, the SDGs are material to your investment. And in that case, that is very helpful to identify those that are material. But then, if you're doing true SDG-aligned investing, you need to think about those SDGs that you may be impacting and other issues to consider too. So you may focus first on those that are material, and that's kind of, very relevant to your business, but then the others as secondary. And just to put it, for instance, I can give you an example of, how at least I approach it as an investor myself. So I like to invest in climate, in solutions for climate change, often related to agriculture, forestry, and investments that are trying to address gender. And those are the things that I care about personally. Each one can say, okay, well, these are the things that I really focus on. But that doesn't mean, so when I look at an investment, and there was a case of tokenization of carbon credits, for instance, and I thought, okay, well, it's interesting, and it was in an emerging market, to be more specific, in forest in the Amazon. So I thought, okay, it really hits a lot of the things I care about. But then I started to look into it. I said, okay, well, they're not addressing what happens with blockchain and climate change, and that is an area that is important. So if you're providing a solution for climate change through the tokenization of carbon credits, it would be important to say, okay, what is the other impact that your solution is having on the environment? And then another issue that for me was also, very concerning is the fact that the board of advisors had no women. It was composed of 15 people, very well known, but not a single woman. So that is an example of something, where you need to look at all of the SDGs. Maybe some of them are more material than others. Maybe the gender issue wasn't that material, but we know that climate change is important. As we were saying, the SDGs are interconnected, and so you need to look at all of them. And as we push for that, then we're going to be able to advance on all of them with investments. So we have more questions, Mirtha, and I think we could the last one is kind of related to what I was saying. Eco-friendly blockchain solutions. I'm not aware. This is an area that I'm looking into. But anyway, it's definitely, and the nice thing about some of these impact investments and investments in solutions is that there's a lot of activity, and it's really fascinating. I find it a fascinating space. Okay, but before we move to that, the next question says, the investment chain is composed of tons of actors, from savers to fundraisers, investment consultants. So in your research, from your perspective, what link of the investment chain is perhaps where the leverage for investing SDG-aligned investment is located? I don't know if you want to give an answer to this. I'm happy to give some thoughts too.
So this is a question that during my time at State Street, I did a lot of research about the investment industry, and the nice thing about working in a company like State Street is that pretty much everybody is our client. So we really need to look at every single piece: the asset owner, the asset manager, the intermediary, and it kind of gave me the opportunity to look at kind of the whole picture. And one thing that happens, and again, I'm going on a tangent here a bit, but is that it's easy to put the responsibility on somebody else, right? So you say, well, I'm an asset manager, it's the asset owner's responsibility. I'm an asset owner, well, maybe it's the asset manager responsibility. Is my asset manager, well, so I feel like in something like this, we all have a role to play. Wherever you're sitting in the value chain, right, in the ecosystem, in the investment community, there are things that you can definitely do. The asset owner community obviously has a lot of power in the industry. So we do want to put kind of the asset owners community on the spot, right, a bit, just to say, there's commitments around achieving, net zero emissions, all of these commitments, the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, now you have the Net Zero Asset Manager Alliance, but there are all these goals for, or these statements that the asset owners are now embracing. That is a great opportunity to make this shift to SDG-aligned investing, and then push this mandate to their asset managers and so on. So the asset owners are clearly, they're in a very influential position. Also, and I want to touch back to one of the points that Luciana mentioned, which is universal owners. So, right, the universal owners are those investors that are long-term, they're diversified, and therefore it is in their best interest to protect these shared social and environmental systems that their portfolio returns are based on, right? So because they're diversified. And not only that, then we see that some asset owners is not only in their best interest to protect these systems, but they also have the power to do so because of their size. So yes, universal owners, we definitely want to have that call of actions to universal owners. You have the rationale, it's in your best interest to really take an active role in protecting these systems. And you actually have the power to do so because you're so influential in the market. So that would be my answer to Danielle. I don't know, Luciana, if there's anything else you want to add.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I'll move to the next question that says, could you please elaborate on the investors toolbox? Specifically, I'm curious about the role that exclusionary screening plays in SDG impact, since it seems counterintuitive to impact investing. Thank you. So in our toolbox, we have two main categories of that when we talk about the investors approach. One is do no harm, and the other one is solutions. And these two, and this is really, I would say, the fact that we put these two together is critical from our perspective, because as I was saying before, you can invest in solutions, and that is, the classic impact investing, but you also need to think about doing no harm. And there are some investments that are not necessarily solutions, and those are the ones where you really have to focus on doing no harm. Let's say you're a bank, you provide financial services. That's not necessarily, to the whole community. Maybe you don't have a specific, I don't know, financial inclusion angle to your business. You have to focus on doing no harm. And then why do we talk about divestment or exclusionary screening within the do no harm? Because, well, there are some industries that can be improved, like and that can be controversial. Some people say, I don't invest in fossil fuels. Other people say, look, we need fossil fuels as a source of energy. So I'm going to engage with those companies to make sure they do things as best as possible and that they offset any carbon emissions and all that. But there are some industries that really just you're not going to be able to make them positive, maybe, so that's why some people say, okay, well, I'm not, tobacco, for smoking, that's never going to be a good thing. So and it's not even necessary. That's one I can think of. Maybe weapons, maybe weapons for the military, okay, but weapons for other people, so that's where the do no harm and the exclusionary comes in, because those are really not providing solutions. Those are industries that are not really, also you can talk about some of the food companies, some of the products of food companies are not healthy. So that it's hard to really make that good. So maybe those are, things that you just say, look, I don't want people to be obese, so I'm not, going to invest in this. And this is sort of my systems approach to that. I want to invest in companies that produce healthy foods and not companies that produce foods that make people sick or addicted. So that's where the divestment and exclusionary screening comes in.
Yes, that's a great point, and I like the example of food, right? Because when we have a company that is creating or is contributing to an obesity crisis in a country, it's putting pressure on the health systems, and it's going to cause an impact in the economy. So again, if you're a universal owner, you need to care. These are costs that are externalized, right? That are pushed to society. And as a universal owner, it doesn't matter if that particular fund or that particular company is outperforming, if it's actually costing you, to the GDP of that particular economy, for instance. So that's an important point. And therefore, as an investor, you need to make decisions, making sure that you're not contributing or your portfolio, you are not investing in companies that basically you're shooting yourself in the foot with certain companies that you're investing in. And the other piece that I would add is an opportunity costs, right? So if there are companies that are creating externalities, if you have an opportunity to free up capital to invest in solutions, that's where also exclusionary comes into place, right? So, so that opportunity cost, freeing up capital by divesting in certain industries, so you can invest in horizontal companies, so you can invest in, you can do more on impact investing, for instance, that is focusing on solutions.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, the next question, I'm happy to start with an answer here. Using the third cardinal C of conviction, what and how can the ESG universe impact legislation that would incentivize SDG investing using investment tax credits and other fiscal devices? So I mean, this is actually a topic that I find extremely interesting. The role of the government in all of these, and all of the, you know, the different governments globally, because a lot of these issues also are global. You cannot solve it just in one country. It impacts, particularly when you look at it from the perspective of a universal owner, it's global. I think, you know, we definitely need governments involved. And if you look at our little toolbox, you'll see we have the minimum safeguards or guardrails. I think that's where the government has to come in. And yes, I think it should be either taxation, should be either disclosure, should be, I mean, there's many ways that governments can level the playing field, provide investors the information they need, and motivate some people to behave incentivize people to behave in certain ways that contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. And I think you know, we're seeing some movement, but also some coordination is required. And I think that's where the SDGs become such a powerful tool, because before it was like, okay, well, we don't, you know, it was, okay, well, these values are your values, are not my values. The SDGs have this universal sense that I think I really have, maybe I live in a bubble, but I have not found, you know, people say, oh, I don't think that reducing poverty is a good idea. Or, you know, that eating healthy foods is a good idea. I mean, some people maybe want to make money on people eating unhealthy foods, but you know, a government is not going to come and say, I don't agree with that. So I think, you know, as far as giving that universality, the SDGs are really powerful and can help, you know, all different governments come together and start to impose some rules that will help to have a more coordinated action. But we are not there yet. The investment community, I think, is right now has a lot of power to start to move in the right direction. Hopefully, governments will all get together and help too.
Yes, and I'm happy to kind of to talk about the next question, which is the one that I think we answered earlier. You know, and how can investors best leverage the SDGs? So I finally saw the question, rather than mapping pre-existing activities. So that analysis, it has to come with that honest analysis or of companies' activities, right? So we're doing right now. So the SDGs and the UN Global Compact have already come out with a specific issues that companies by industry need to be thinking about. We also have the level, like depending on the country that you're in, you can also look at what SDGs are more critical in each country. So there's definitely a lot of information that can help companies do this analysis and that can help investors. And again, that's basically one of the projects that we're doing now. It's to do a very rigorous analysis of the SDGs that are based on impact, that are based on you know, actually a 4-pillar framework that Columbia University has put out, that looks at products, that looks at supply chains, that look at production and lobbying activities, that is very comprehensive. So that's going to require a lot of resources in the part of the company and in the part of the investor. The other piece, and this is part of some of the conversations that I've been having with actually some corporates, that it's hard for them to maybe come honest about it or come clean about some of these externalities because they're going to get punished. They're going to get punished by the investment community. That's their fear. So how can they come out and say, I have a lot of work to do, I have a lot of improvements, if they're actually going to get punished by investors, right? So it has to be, I think there's where the room for collaboration can come into place. That's the room of saying, yes, these are the shortcomings for my company's activities, but these are our plans that we have put in place to transition or to try to solve for that. But I think it has to come with that honest analysis to at least start having that conversation. And investors, how do we create an environment where we are actually part of the solution rather than just pushing companies to basically hide some of these concerns? So I don't necessarily have an answer, but that's, again, one challenge that has been brought up to my attention, that it's something that we also need to consider. So yeah, so that would be, again, one additional point that I wanted to add to that anonymous question. Happy to jump, in the interest of time, to the double materiality question from Sarah. So happy to jump in there, and Luciana, the lawyer, she can definitely give us more of that perspective, particularly from the US. But so double materiality, so traditional materiality is looking at issues that are going to impact a company's performance. That comes from the shareholder primacy model, that's basically saying, I only care about issues that is going to affect my company's bottom line. That's kind of the SASB framework, right? ESG issues that are material to my company and that fall into the traditional view of materiality. Now, the double materiality, which was introduced in Europe last year by the NFRD regulation, they said we should look at that, which is kind of say the SASB world, I call it, materiality, and look at how, not only that, but also at how my activities are affecting the world, irrespective if they're material, if they're going to affect my bottom line. Like it's not about your company, it's about the world. So how are my activities are affecting the world? So that's the different perspective. That's kind of the GRI world, right? So you have the SASB world, materiality, the GRI world, which is outcomes and stakeholders, and bringing those two worlds together is the double materiality concept. So I'll stop here. I don't know, Luciana, if you want to add something else.
Yeah, I just don't want to get too technical. But this obviously presents sometimes some issues from a legal perspective, depending on the type of fiduciary that you are and what the interests of your investors are and what the different regulations that would apply to your what you do. But in the case of private funds, it's not too complicated as long as the mandate you have talks about, if your investors want for you to invest with impact or to take into consideration the SDGs and all that's very clear. It gets a little trickier when we talk about public pension plans and things of that nature. And there's a lot of conversation, as we were talking about, the goals long term, and also how if you are considering certain things that will really impact the returns in the long term, and you have beneficiaries of different ages. So there's an argument to be made in that regard, that these, all of these systems are material and will impact the returns. But again, we're still, particularly in the US, within the world. I mean, the conservative advice generally is that you have to tie your investment strategy to performance. But again, things are moving and governments are realizing that, and generally everybody, that it takes collaborative approach and the real understanding that if we don't care about the long term, we are going to have these type of systemic crises that in the end are going to impact everybody's returns.
Yeah. And maybe I will touch briefly on the individual investors as well, right? And the expectations for institutional investors. There's a study that we quote in our paper. There's one from Morgan Stanley that they did a survey with asset owners. There's another one from the CFA Institute that they also look at institutional investors and individual investors that was published later last year. Both of those studies show that one of the reasons, or one of the most important reasons that people are looking at ESG is to create a positive impact. I believe it was a little over 50% for institutional investors, and it was like 80% for retail investors. So there are expectations that ESG can support the creation of a better world, right? Or addressing these climate issues and social issues. And the problem is that, like I mentioned at the very early of my presentations, there's no evidence that ESG as it is defined today actually is creating this impact. We need to think outside of the box if we really want to deliver on this implicit mandate, let's say, or its implicit expectation from ESG investors, for institutional and individual and beneficiaries, that are paying higher fees for these strategies, but they're not seeing the impact, right? So that's why, like I talk about innovation, we shouldn't be thinking about innovation just like technological innovations, but also innovations about the way that we're making investment decisions, how we're thinking of information, how we're analyzing companies. So that's the type of innovation that we hope with this paper we can start we start the conversation about how we think about, engagement. And there's a great term that I learned recently, forceful engagement, right? Like what does that mean? And is that something that we should be rethinking, redesigning? And specifically something with engagement, which has proven to be, again, based on research, to be the most effective tool for investors to create real world impact. Why are we not doing more of that? Why are we not focusing on engagement on issues that are addressing systemic issues rather than disclosures, which again has proven, research shows that is not effective necessarily to create impact, or issues that are material, which of course are not going to really address negative externalities. So how do we rethink engagement? How do we think about guardrails? There's this great work that the organization, the Shareholder Commons, is doing regarding guardrails. It was an honor to have them as part of our advisory board, but they're also doing very innovative things, specifically to create impact. So our call of action really, or the one thing that I want all of you to take away, is that we need to innovate in the way that we're thinking about investment and engagement beyond what we're looking in the ESG integration world that unfortunately has fallen short to create, to really address these challenges that our clients want to address with their money, right? With their investments. Yeah, so there was one more question, and I know we only have a few more minutes. Luciana, anything you wanted to add on this?
No.
Okay, good. So I wanted to just make a comment to Sophia. She made a comment about the ABC. I'm assuming that's the Impact Management Project ABC framework, which is fantastic. In fact, a lot of our recommendations are based on work that we have studied as part of our research and that we thought that was kind of spot on. The ABC framework is one of them. And we are using that as an example of a type of impact analysis that is comprehensive and that could be supportive of an SDG-aligned investment approach. Let's see what else. Okay, I think we covered all the questions. I hope I did, and that Luciana and I were able to cover a lot of this. So I would maybe, Luciana, in this last minute, maybe ask you just for a final thought in maybe what is exciting for you today? Like, what are some of the things that you've been seeing that are particularly exciting to you, or are particularly innovative, since we're in the innovation theme, that you would like to share with the audience?
Well, I mean, as far as, innovation, there's a lot, and because of things I do, I'm seeing a lot, but what really has me very excited, I think when I started saying, 2020 has been a really difficult year for everybody, but I think there's a little bit of a silver lining, and that is that point that we're all starting to focus on things that are that have impacted us all. We've seen what can happen. If anything, the concerns on climate change, inequality are really getting, to investors of all sizes. I mean, we know, BlackRock is being a big proponent of really focusing on climate change. I mean, these things are right now not just a little niche. They are coming in the mainstream, and people are asking for answers, and that's what really has me excited, because now we're going to see more movement on the side of the government. We're going to see more movement on investors, mainstream investors. Impact investing world continues to develop. There's a lot happening there, and it's really starting to become more precise and focus on measuring the impacts. So I'm optimistic. I mean, there's a lot to do, but at least I feel like we are all starting to focus on the same things, and I think the SDGs have a lot to do with that.
Yes, definitely. And we have one more question that I'm happy to touch on in this last minute from Rich Stein. So how do SDG-based investments perform versus the market? So we don't have a lot of this data, right? So, and there's not an SDG strategy that we don't have a 10-year history that we can kind of draw to make some of these decisions. So one concept, so there's two things. We talked about resiliency of markets and resilient companies. There is a paper from George Serafin last year that he did with State Street Bank that just look at performance of companies after COVID that came out very strongly to support their employees with flex work and a variety of different policies that were really focusing on their employee. Those companies actually outperform in the following quarter, right? So it could have been brand, it could have been, again, it's kind of hard to make those connections, but that's basically an example of a new term called dynamic materiality, which shows that things that were non-material in the past are now material in the future, right? So, and that's the SDGs could provide those signposts, let's say, of things that are going to become important. Climate, employee engagements, things that are very hard to predict, but are basically the foundation of a strong, resilient company. So that is more of a forward-looking approach that again talks about resilience, but also reputational green risk and others. Materiality, it's that Luciana and I talk about this. We don't like the word dynamic materiality necessarily because materiality is by definition dynamic. But yeah, it's just a nice way to just understand that SDGs is what in the future could be, are issues that are going to become more and more important. And obviously with COVID, we saw it firsthand. If you're a universal owner, by default, you don't necessarily need to think about performance. You need to think about the systems as the basis for your long-term returns. So that information is not necessarily going to be, let's say, as critical on, short-term market outperformance. So I will stop here. Thank you, everybody, for your great questions. Hopefully we were able to answer and provide you some insights that were valuable to you. Please reach out, and we'd love to continue the conversation separately if you're interested. And thank you, Luciana, for your time today and for sharing also your thoughts. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.